scheduling. Now that you know everything that you need to know about agentic workflows in order to build them and then use them, it's time to take these things, which up until now have been constrained to your own device or your integrated development environments, and then put them in the cloud where they can be triggered through means other than you actually prompting. So, in order to do this successfully, which I'm going to call cloudifying my workflows, we don't actually upload the orchestrator itself. Remember in the loop where we have the directives, the orchestration layer, and then the executions? What we don't upload is the orchestrator. All we really do is upload the execution scripts themselves, which are the deterministic parts. You can also upload the directives too, if you wanted to provide context to a model later on in case it wanted to edit or whatever. So for the most part, just upload the execution scripts. I'm going to show you guys how to do that and some alternatives. The way that you can think of it is as creating mini APIs that do one specific thing reliably. And the same concepts apply whether you're using Doe or other frameworks like Cloud Skills or whatever. Now, you may be wondering, Nick, what is fundamentally different about this versus what we were doing before? Well, what's fundamentally different about this versus what we're doing before is there is no LLM. Instead, all we're really doing is we're just creating our own API, and we're using LLMs to do it really, really quickly and easily with some sort of defined input and output. The reason why is because you need to remember stochasticity or sort of randomness, the tendency for models to eventually diverge from what it is that you wanted them to do over time, given enough time steps. So because of this, LLMs are very probabilistic and they sort of have randomness in every direction. When they're working in your IDE, for the most part, you're around, right? Whether you're not looking at it right this second, you'll probably look at it at some point over the course of the next hour. And because of that, if it has an issue, you're watching, you can course correct. But if it's 3 a.m., okay, and this is running unattended with full system permissions, this level of variability is a liability. And so we're taking the AI just out of the cloud loop entirely. Additionally, instead of having slightly different routing decisions like we see here, we're just going to force them into one routing decision every time using what's called server-side logic. So because your execution scripts do the same thing every time, you never actually have to suffer this. Instead, it's always just, hey, we start by executing node 1, then we move to executing node 2, and then so on and so on and so forth to node n. And all we're doing is we're taking those execution scripts, deploying them as standalone cloud functions. No LLM in the loop, just an API on a schedule or responding to webhooks. The intelligence that we use during this process is just used to build the execution scripts, not to actually run them. In this way, you can consider this like basically deploying your own mini app. A good way to think about this is, like your agent is the architect and your cloud workflow is the building. Architects design buildings all the time, but it's very rare that they actually live in the buildings they design, right? So what our agent is doing in this point is just architecting our beautiful building, and we're going to put execution scripts to live in there instead. This obviously loses a fair amount. I mean, this takes our agentic workflows and changes them back into traditional workflows or procedural workflows. It means that they can't adapt to unexpected situations on the fly. They also can't self-anneal or ask clarifying questions when things get weird. You are going back to that old school traditional automation behavior, and it just does exactly what you told it to do, nothing more, nothing less. But if you think about it, by the time your workflows deploy, they should be pretty battle tested, as I was mentioning earlier, from having run dozens of times locally. And you've probably already worked out all the kinks in your IDE locally where the debugging is easy. So if something breaks, you are still going to get error notifications. And the really cool thing is you can just fix it with your agent. If you're using a modern platform like Modal, models can read the errors from Modal really easily. So you can actually just say, hey, this workflow I think is broken, fix it. And I can actually go and I can just do the debugging process for you. So you get all of like the ability to debug and stuff like that. It's just you're not doing it on like a live loop. Because if you were doing it on a live loop, results, assuming that it doesn't do what you wanted to do, could be catastrophic, go all over the place. And I mean, like I could sit here and I could give you guys a way to do this that includes the orchestrator directly in the environment. I could have the agent actually like listening and constantly modifying things. But I've tried this now in a few actual businesses. And despite the fact that it's very shiny and it's very sexy and people are like, wow, I can just query my LLM, on some cloud container somewhere and have it do whatever I want via webhook. Despite the fact that it seems really cool, we're just not there yet. I'm pretty sure we'll be there some point in the next couple of years. But for now, we're just going to leave the orchestrator out of it completely and basically just use our agentic workflow building skills to build APIs really quickly that we can then call. So the platform that I use for all this is called Modal. Modal is not the only platform out there. There are many others like Trigger.dev, etc. I'm not associated with any of these, but Modal is just a good product. Trigger.dev is a good product. We've set up some workflows there. And there are a couple of other builders too that like essentially do this function. But essentially, the way that modal works is it's really simple. You just take a Python script and then you turn it into a cloud function. It's also pay per use. So when your workflow isn't running, it'll spin down and it'll cost nothing. You'll get a webhook URL just like you would from Make or N8N. And it's also very cheap, especially for Python-based execution scripts. They gave me $5 of credits at the beginning of this month, and I think so far I've used like 3 cents. So very, very, very affordable. The best part is you don't need to know anything about any of these platforms, to be honest. They're built for agents, and so agents know how to crawl them and traverse them and set things up really easily because their documentation is fantastic. All I really had to do in order to do this, which I'll show you in a moment, is say, turn this into a cloud function, and then it did everything else. Now, the webhook URLs that Modal gives you can be called from anywhere, including by other agents, and then it also allows people at, regardless of whatever skill level you are, to set up this sort of webhook or event-driven flow. It's sort of like N8N or Make.com or, Gumloop or Zapier, any one of these platforms. These will expose these little webhook URLs, right? And you take these webhook URLs and then you give them to services like, ClickUp or Instantly or PandaDoc or whatever the heck you want, right? Well, this is exactly what Modal does. It's just instead of giving it to you in sort of this visual way, we just do it through natural language. We're like, hey, set this thing up and then give me a webhook URL so that I can call. Here's what the request body is going to look like. Cool, we done? Awesome. Thank you very much. That said, wanted to take a couple steps back here just in case people didn't know what webhooks are. If what I just said made no sense to you, that's okay. I'm going to cover it. First of all, a webhook is literally just a URL that triggers your workflow when something hits it. So an external system like a CRM or website form or Make or N8N can actually just call a URL like this automatically. It's just like a doorbell. When somebody presses it, your workflow will wake up and run. You don't necessarily have to be there to do it. If you guys have ever done any home automation stuff, any sort of switches or whatnot, it's the same idea. There's like some URL somewhere, some destination. It could even be your website. And when somebody visits it, it triggers something that does something else. Obviously, there's something else in this case is going to be our automated workflow. If I had a URL like this, let's say it's my nick-birthday-bot.webhook.com, I could do anything with this URL. Like I could literally just enter this into my browser and press enter and it would trigger a flow. Or I could send an HTTP request, which is like a web request through make.com, N8N, any other no-code builder. I could do it through my terminal. I could do it through an agent. But basically, this is just a destination on the internet. Okay, that's like a node. And when somebody accesses the node, this thing does some logic. And depending on whether or not the node input fits its specifications, it'll continue and then call whatever the heck you want. So webhooks really are just like URL with some logic attached to them. That's more or less it. And they're very, very common in any sort of automated scenario. All right, so what is the agent doing behind the scenes in order to set this up for you? Well, it'll review our agents.md and our Claude.md and our Gemini.md and so on and so forth, just to understand the setup first. Ideally, somewhere in there, you would say, hey, as part of your work, one of the things you do is you set up cloud webhooks or cloud scheduled workflows on Modal. Here's how to do so. What it then does is it looks at your existing execution scripts for the workflow that you want to deploy. It'll wrap everything in a simple format that Modal really likes, proper decorators and whatnot. And then if there are any prompts or API keys or whatever, it'll actually ask you for them. Although I find most of the time it's plug and play. It's just like, oh, I have the keys. Let me convert them into Modal's format. Once deployed, you get a simple URL. This is the, node that it calls. This is the phone number that other systems can give a ring in order to make something happen. And then in whatever service you're using, because this is obviously being triggered by some service, by some notification from Slack or some incoming webhook from Instantly or whatever, you just give them the webhook URL. And a lot of the time there's like a field or something and it'll say, hey, what's the webhook URL you want us to send results to? And then you just put it there. The request just needs to match the format that the agent expects. It's usually in what's called JSON or JavaScript object notation. You don't actually need to know JSON nowadays. All you need to do is be able to recognize it. Typically starts with some curly braces. And then when your agent sees this, you can just copy and paste whatever you see in the webhook documentation. It'll go from a demo to actually doing stuff really, really quickly, which is fantastic. If you don't know how to connect stuff, you literally just ask, hey, how do I set up, ClickUp to call this webhook when a new lead comes in? Agent or Claude or Gemini or whatever you're using will actually walk you through all that step by step. Especially if it's a platform-specific UI thing. I find a lot of the time it'll just be like, oh, here's the link. Just go to this link and then you're done. You don't need to spend hours Googling stuff or ChatGPTing stuff. This is exactly what the tools are good at, so don't sweat it. And to take that one step further, if you wanted to, instead of making it webhook-driven, have it schedule-driven, you just use something called cron. Again, this is something that's very native that is supported by Modal and our agents out of the box. Instead, you just say, hey, can you run this thing at 5 p.m. every single day, and it'll do it. No complex configuration. You just describe when you want something to run. It'll handle all the syntax and deployment details. It's just kind of annoying for me because I spent a lot of time learning cron way back in the day when I wanted to schedule simple things. But yeah, it's just like setting a recurring calendar reminder. You're just doing it for your workflows. So God bless the fact that we are at this point where technology can do all that for us. because good Lord, do I not want to have to learn another scheduling syntax again. Okay, so some example prompts. You just say, I want my weekly workflow report to run automatically every Monday at 9 a.m. It'll actually set up the cron for you, deploy it to modal, and so on and so forth. Agent will figure out the rest. Whatever your timing is, whether it's every minute, every hour, every year, every 2,000 years, whatever, like you can set this stuff up really, really easily. Don't sweat it. There is some like misunderstanding usually in modal about like API keys and tokens and credentials and stuff like that. Inevitably, you will need obviously to connect one platform to another. And there is always going to be some inherent risk in uploading a secret to the server. So just keep that in mind. By making things cloud accessible, you are introducing a little bit of risk. You're basically setting up a server on the internet, right? Like anybody can theoretically access it if they know your credentials, password, whatever. So your agent will prompt you naturally. It'll say, hey, this script needs your Apollo API key. Should I use what's in your .env? All you do is you just say yes, you just say no. You say, hold on, use this one instead or whatever. The way that modal works really is they will store these credentials as an encrypted secret, which is separate from your code. And then the credentials only actually run when somebody calls the webhook. So it's never actually like in the code base or whatever. It's kind of similar to how we separate our code from the .env file in our IDE. Very, very common. It's not specific to agent workflows, but yeah, it's the same way that professional engineering teams do this sort of thing. And then what happens to your IDE is it basically just becomes your command center. I mean, I obviously do both cloud workflows and then I also do local workflows. And I actually just like have all of them operate from my IDE. Like I will say, hey, run this workflow. And it'll be like, okay, this is a cloud workflow. So I'm going to call this webhook URL. Then it'll actually create its own request and then send it to my own server, which is kind of cool. Although keep in mind that when you do that, as I mentioned earlier, you will remove the agentic kind of part, the self-annealing and so on and so forth. What's really cool though is your IDE helps you get this done too. And then what you end up with is you actually end up with specific agentic workflows made to automate the process of uploading things to modal, which is pretty sweet. What are my recommendations around when to actually turn something into a cloud workflow? Just scheduled workflows. If you guys have stuff that is like a daily report or a weekly summary or some sort of like recurring scrape or HTTP request, like you can do that in modal, no problem. If it's event triggered, aka it's very timely, you need to do something within a few moments of some other requests coming in, then set up the webhook functionality like I talked about, and then boom. But if it doesn't fit one of these two categories, believe it or not, probably is best to stay local. If it does not need to run when you're not around, it's probably better to like run it while you are around because as I mentioned, these agentic workflow things, they multiply your leverage like crazy right now, right? But they also multiply the error bounds. So you should probably be around to see in case it does something you don't want it to do. Now, if you're just hanging around by your computer for 3 or 4 hours a day or whatever, keep in mind you are now doing like 3 or 4 hours a day of work. Keep in mind that like you are now capable of doing 30 to 40 hours of work in the 3 or 4 hours with agentic workflows. So it's not like you're really losing too much here. You're multiplying your leverage as all technology is done. But there are, of course, some instances in automations where you just always want to run the thing automatically, and that's what this is for. Last thing I really need to mention about this is logging and monitoring. Now, if something happens in your IDE, it's typically pretty easy to see where it went wrong. Why? Because you have little reasoning windows that you can pop open, right? It's very easy for you to like see and poke around and be like, okay, I could see that there was a problem here with this HTTP request and so on and so forth. But right out of the box, in the cloud, you don't have access to that. And most of this logging functionality is not around. So cloud deployments don't have that. What that means is your agent actually needs to explicitly force the logging in the code. It won't always be able to do this. And when it can't do this, the debug process can take quite a while. That said, okay, if you learn how to build in some form of observability, that's what this is called in programming, in from the start, it becomes a lot more straightforward. My own personal monitoring setup is I actually have a dedicated Slack channel called agentic-cloud-log for all cloud workflow updates. So every time a workflow runs, it'll actually automatically send an update to my own Slack channel, letting me know if it was successful or not. I have like a pretty superficial high-level version of interpretability now and observability. If something happens, I know that it worked. If something doesn't happen, I know that it didn't work. It's not as like super in-depth as it could be, but it's simple enough that I could just look at that and then go to my agent and then say, hey, I noticed this thing isn't working. Can you double check and see what's going on? And then it can do its loop on its own. I don't need to be around. And then, I can continue working on something else while it does that. But if I didn't have this, if I didn't know, then obviously that would be a problem. I've seen some ways that people have built automated systems where they will automatically take an error notification and send it back to another cloud, a Claude or a Gemini or, GPT 5.2 instance or something like that, and basically say, hey, there was some error with this thing, fix it. And it'll just like do it completely autonomously. I think that stuff can be kind of cool. Although keep in mind, like, Most people aren't building like 3,000 webhooks a day, right? So that's usually not the actual bottleneck. The bottleneck is more like, why are you building this webhook in the first place? So I don't really want to like mislead people here and have them build these cool automatic self-fixing loops when it doesn't really matter all that much in the first place. Not to mention like the probability of it actually entirely fixing itself without introducing more errors is pretty low. And, hopefully you guys understand what I'm trying to say. Okay, so pretty easy to do that. You just say, hey, when you deploy to modal, make sure to add logging that sends me a Slack message every time it runs. Here's my Slack webhook URL. If you don't have that, you can ask it, hey, get me a Slack webhook URL. If you're using Discord or something, you can do the same thing there. If you, want a text message or an email address, you can obviously set that up on your end as well. Pretty straightforward. I also say stuff like, hey, could you give me a status check on all my modal deployments? How are they going? It'll go through all of the modal deployments, run through their logs. It has access to its API. As I mentioned, the docs are pretty straightforward. And so you end up just getting everything that you need from a check-in like this. So you can do it manually. You can do it based off of like some Slack notification. You can do it based off the email notice that you get. There are a lot of ways to error handle this. The reality is you just need to know to do this. If you don't do this, you're going to have a bad time. In the future, we will have cloud native agents, right? Instead of leaving the orchestrator out of this, we're going to actually be inserting the orchestrator in. And so we're going to minimize that agent accuracy as models get more intelligent and people design better frameworks to deal with us. It'd be pretty cool, right? If you think about it, what you could do is you could just send a natural language query to, let's say, nix-agent.com. This is my agent with a question mark, which is a query parameter that says run the lead scraper. It would then go through the agent PT MRO loop. It would do planning. It would do tool use. It would check its memory. It would do some reasoning and reflection before finally doing the orchestration. But as I mentioned now, we're just at the point where the error bars are a little too high. It will be pretty cool though, because once you're done with that, you'll be able to set up a whole ecosystem of just cloud agents that talk to each other and hang out. So, you'll have one agent here, Nick's agent, then you'll have Peter's agent, and then Sam's agent. Then Peter's agent will say something to Nick's agent, which will query Sam's agent for more information. They'll decide on something together, and then, you could even introduce payments into this sort of structure and more. So early versions of this do exist today. I've published some videos exploring some of them. Just check out my channel. They're just a little too high risk right now, and it just doesn't really make too much sense to do that all yourself. Okay, so I'm going to walk you through actual modal webhook deployment now. I have a bunch of prompt templates and stuff like that. You can obviously get all of that stuff in the link at the very top of our description. Let's actually go through setting up webhooks in modal. All right, now let's talk about how to take your directives that are inside of your IDE and then put them on the cloud, specifically on a service called modal.com. Now, in case you guys were unaware, Modal is basically what's called serverless infrastructure, which is where they have these virtual servers that they spin up on demand on the fly every time that you want them to do something. What's really cool is most of the time, these serverless infrastructures sort of bend into one of two camps. One is they're like online all the time, and then they're always charging you some usage per minute, second, week, month, whatever. The second is they're offline, but then they have to start. This is termed a cold start. And cold starts typically just take a lot of time and energy, so that if you have a flow that requires like instant reaction, like a lot of the executions that you realistically want to host in the cloud, it takes a fair amount of time and you don't actually get it instantly. You get it after like a minute or two. So what's really cool is Modal solves both of these problems. And what you can do is you can just take the execution scripts that you developed and then put them on Modal, so long as you have the right system prompt, and have it work essentially instantaneously. So what you do is you create an account on this service, and I should note that I'm not affiliated with them. Do whatever you want. There are a variety of other ways to do this, but this is definitely the simplest one. They give you a bunch of free credits, at least as of the time of this recording. And it's worth me noting that I've used Modal now for like at least 2 weeks, maybe 3, and I've used 4 cents out of the $5 available. Like realistically, you're not going to run out of this credit usage just as a test. I can't imagine how much $30 in free credits would take you. If you're just using like agentic workflows for yourself or for like a small to mid-sized business, this will take you really far. So it's, not free, but it's virtually costless. Once you're done, because we added all the information into our Claude MD and our Agents MD and so on and so forth, if we want to push one of our flows to Modal, it's actually really easy. All we need to do is just get some authentication going and then obviously find the specific flow that we want. So I want to do the create proposal. I'm going to speak to my agent. Hey, I'd like to create a modal webhook for create_proposal MD. I basically just want to be able to replicate the functionality of that and just do it on the cloud instead. Get me a webhook URL for this. So now it's going to go through, read my pre-existing system prompt, which will include a bunch of information all about this. All right, this is almost done working through the modal webhook. As part of the system prompt, we set up what's called a webhooks.json. This is just a giant list of all of the different webhooks we have. I should note that before it was empty, so all we did is we just populated it. We're now getting some information about the webhook that we set up, and it looks like it was deployed successfully. So we actually have a webhook now available at this URL here, nic-90891-claude-orchestrator-directive, and so on and so forth. It looks like this takes all of our information in as follows. So, I mean, like we could hard code all of these. We could also have AI generate them. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to have it run. Okay, great. Could you run a brief example, then return the URL when it's done? Okay, and it looks like at the end of it, we got our proposal, which is right over here. Let's take a look and see how it did. Demo Corp AI automation pilot has some brief problem areas, has some brief solution areas. You guys remember we built this earlier on in the course. And yeah, we now have essentially an automated proposal generator. Obviously, I wouldn't just like send an HTTP request to this with this information. This is a little bit short. I'm not going to call something Demo Corp, nor am I going to call manual data entry taking 20 hours per week. I'm going to go into a lot more detail. So just for the purposes of this, I'll say, great, please update the documentation. Every time I call this, I want to make sure that the demo that I'm providing is really complete. So lengthen the paragraphs for the benefits and the solution statements, make things longer in general, and significantly more realistic. Then rerun the test. And opening up the new proposal, let's see what this one looks like. Cool. I mean, we did write, I guess it took my description of long to mean that we should write the title long too. But these look significantly better. Check this out. We now have way more customized information here. Yeah, this is much, much better. Awesome. So that's great. So what did we learn today? We learned that it is actually really easy to set up a webhook. All we really need to do is we just take our flow, which, in our case was the creation of a proposal, and then send it to our agent alongside some system prompts that describe how to upload agentic workflows to the cloud. Obviously, we need to add our documentation and so on and so forth. Really cool thing about Modal is it's just one click. It takes like 2 seconds. You just go get your Modal API key and then post it in here. It'll ask you to do so. In terms of how to create the token, you just click on that new token. The token secret is on the right, so that's what you copy. And then you just paste it directly in here when it asks you for the Modal token, and boom, you're done. And yeah, that's how to do it with webhooks. Okay, now that we've set that up, let's actually go through setting up scheduled triggers in Modal as well. This is different from webhooks, obviously, because now we want it to do so on a schedule, not just like based off of some event that comes in. So last time we did this with webhooks, let me show you instead how to do it with some sort of schedule trigger. Maybe instead of running this via webhook call, what I want to do is I want to run a really simple workflow, probably some lead scraper or something like that, every 5 minutes. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to tell it which thing I want to run and then how often I want to run it. And then everything baked into the system prompt is super easy, and it'll just tell Modal to run this using what's called cron. Hey, could you send a welcome email to nick@leftclick.ai every 5 minutes? And I want you to set up a Modal cloud scheduled trigger to do this for me automatically. Cool, so now it's setting up the Modal scheduled function to send the welcome email every 5 minutes. First, it's going to check the existing schedule function pattern, realizes that there is no schedule function pattern, so now it's just going to add some scheduled welcome emails. Cool, and now we have it. Scheduled welcome email is live, schedule every 5 minutes, so that's what that looks like in cron. What we're going to do now is we're going to send. What's really cool is when you add them, you can actually see the various schedule triggers. So there's one here with a little clock icon that says every 5 minutes UTC. If I click on this, you'll see that there are no scheduled calls that have gone out yet, but there is one in 1 minute and 9 seconds. And Modal's cool because it actually allows you to run in between a schedule. So you can just click on that little Run Now button. And when you click the Run Now button, it'll actually do the thing. You can see here that it took 3 seconds to start up the server and 1.47 seconds to actually send. Finally, if I go to the email address that I specified, you can see that it's actually sent the email. Now, I mean, in this case, I just used a basic kind of onboarding email template, or rather it created a basic onboarding email template. If I wanted to update this, I just tell my agent, hey, change this that it's like a welcome email from whatever to whatever. I could even give it a template. I could give it whatever it wanted to. And just so that you guys could see it actually run, I'm just going to wait until this counter goes down to 0 so you guys see what occurs when you set up a schedule. It's pretty straightforward. I mean, at the end of the day, since we're no longer using directives in our cloud, servers, all we're really doing here is we're just running a Python script, right? Because it's a Python script, these things execute nearly instantly, and that's really, really helpful. Rather than have to wonder about whether or not this thing is sent, rather than have to wait a really long startup time or send and receive things to or from Anthropic, we execute pretty quick. And as you see, because we just finished the previous query, I think within like 3 or 4 minutes or something like that, we didn't even have to wind down the server. So this one took 0 milliseconds. And this execution time was under 1 second. So, I mean, we just did this whole thing in like less than a second flat, which is really cool. Heading back over here, you see that we now have the same email. This is your scheduled welcome email. And then we also have that 5-minute block that we talked about. It's almost 10 p.m. UTC, which is why that time says that. Cool. So hopefully I've convinced you guys that setting up these sorts of webhook-based triggers and schedule-based triggers is actually really easy. That definitely isn't the bottleneck here. Before, with no-code platforms like Zapier and N8N and Make.com and stuff like that, you had to be a lot more precise. Now you just get the URL. And what can we do with the webhook URL? Well, now I can just connect it to whatever service I want. I could very easily set it up so that, let's say, when one of my prospects moves to the send proposal stage in my ClickUp CRM, for instance, which, by the way, I can control completely agentically using the agentic workflow that I set up previously as an example, we then trigger the webhook, and maybe that occurs automatically as well. And so in this way, we build a full end-to-end completely automatic flow with webhook URLs that I could share within my organization or give to other people. And that's it. You now know how to build workflows that essentially run without you. The next step is to take this to the next level. Right now, we've been running agents sequentially, which just means one at a time. But imagine a future where you could actually run multiple agents simultaneously. That's what this next chapter is going to be about. It's going to be about parallelizing your work to multiply your output. Essentially, you're going to go from one employee to a whole team. Instead of doing things like this, where you finish task 1, and then you do task 2, and then you do task 3, we're actually going to, in one fell swoop, actually do tasks 1, 2, and 3, then we're just going to recombine the outputs. And we can do this arbitrarily, basically, all the way to n service workers or threads or instances of an agent, so long as you set up the environment right. Okay, so how do you set up multiple agents simultaneously? Well, spoiler alert, all you're really doing is just opening multiple terminal instances. Nothing super magical here. In VS Code, or anti-gravity, or any terminal-based workflow, they all provide you the ability to open multiple panes, which allows you to run Gemini, GPT, Claude Code, whatever the heck you want in different terminal windows. My favorite way to do this right now, and sort of my optimal, is 3. I don't really work with more than 3 simultaneously unless we're doing long background tasks, just because I find that my attention starts wavering and I start losing effectiveness at remembering what the heck I'm doing. I always just do this vertically, left, middle, and right. I'll show you guys examples of all that stuff in a minute. So instead of just doing all of this within a single IDE, you can also be kind of smart about it. Most models are basically at approximately the same level right now. Like if this is 3 different models, they're basically all capping out at similar levels of intelligence. There are mild differences between them, but most of them are trained on the same data, trained in similar ways. And so they're all kind of reaching same levels right now. So if you find yourself with an IDE or a model, I should say, like Gemini with an anti-gravity that has stricter rate limits or higher costs, instead of running 3 instances of, let's say, Claude against each other, you could run 1 instance of Claude, then you could run 1 instance of Gemini, and then you could run 1 instance of GPT 5.2 or something. By doing all this stuff simultaneously, the frontier models will remain at a similar intelligence level. You're also going to get some slightly different ways to do work, which can be beneficial for you if you're still in the building stage or the doing stage, not necessarily running this sort of stuff really high scale. And then because we have the same initialization files, AgentsMD, ClaudeMD, GeminiMD, etc., there's no functional difference for the model. As a result, instead of, let's say, this is the threshold here, where you pay $200 a month for the plan of Claude. I think this is the Claude Max plan or something like that. And then you have to pay another, $100 in credits after you hit this threshold, right? So instead of being like this, what we basically do is we get to use 3 models instead and keep them below that threshold the entire time. I'm going to show you guys this and a bunch of others in anti-gravity, and then, have you guys run through practical ways to do this. Another thing I wanted to mention was practical limits on parallel agents. So I find that in practice, 2 simultaneous agents is probably the average baseline that I like sticking at. 4 agents is what I consider to be my soft max before things start getting counterproductive. It seems really cool when you have a million tabs open and all these agents are working on things. You feel like a superpower, right? But you're not actually being productive. You're you're just feeling productive. So instead of like being in a situation like that, where most of the agent time will actually be spent waiting for you to like see the tab and like do something with it, I want you guys to know that feeling busy is not the same thing as actually being busy. Feeling productive is not the same thing as being productive. So this is a good way to just like help monitor that. I stick to 3 to 4. Any more than that, and you're probably just shooting yourself in the foot. Okay, so I've talked a little bit about this before, but when you don't know how to build a workflow, you have a couple of approaches here. You can obviously just say, hey, can you build a workflow for me that does this? And as like a first pass, that's fine. But an advanced way to do it is actually say, hey, can you give me 3 approaches to build this thing? What you do is you take those 3 approaches and then you give them to either separate models or separate instances. Then what you do is once they're all done, you test to see which one scores the best. So maybe this one here scores 75%, this one here scores 84%, this one here scores 99%. What are you going to do? Obviously, you're going to use this one, right? This one's the best combination of speed, cost, accuracy, and so on and so forth. In doing this, rather than having to, get a subpar solution and then slowly like make a bunch of changes to get to this point, you can actually just run these 3 agents in parallel and get 3 times the total search space. Instead of like manually going through this process one by one by one, I want you to imagine dividing this into 3 sections, having 3 of these little snakes go at the same time, which is just much, much faster, and then ultimately build something that is way better and way more scalable. How do you do this? Really straightforward. Just send that brief list of bullet points describing what you want to build to one agent. Then say, can you generate 3 distinct approaches with in-depth steps for each? Because I'm going to send this over to another model. Also, give me some pros and cons so I can understand the trade-offs up front. And this will take you a few minutes up front, but it'll also save you a lot of time, because if you go with a subpar solution initially, 2 or 3 hours down the line, you may still be working out some bugs or kinks or ways to make things faster. Whereas if you just started with the right architecture right off the bat, you would have had all that stuff solved. Once you're done with that, it's pretty easy. Just open 3 separate instances of your agent, one for every approach. Give each agent a dedicated working folder. I like doing this in TMP, so I do like temporary folder /1, temporary folder /2, temporary folder /3, and actually just copy a prompt and I'll say, hey, you're currently working in this folder. The reason why is because we're creating 3 copies of a similar build with 3 different approaches. I want to do it here so that we're not, crisscrossing files and so on and so forth. I'll show you guys a brief example of what that looks like in a moment. Once you're done, you just review all 3 outputs side by side, pick your favorite approach based off the actual result and the theoretical assumptions, then you move the winning solution into Doe or whatever it is that you're using, Claude Skills and so on and so forth. Once it's moved over, you obviously also have to retest everything. And the reason why is because if you don't retest everything, when the files are moved over, there may just be some issues with file references and that sort of thing. So this lets you do 3 builds in the same amount of time. Best one wins. You can obviously do exactly what I'm talking about, not just for the building, but also for the doing. You can run dozens of agents. And there are also things like background tasks, which allow you to run agents sort of like in the background so that you could still do something else in parallel on top of it within a single thread. So I've talked a lot about building agentic workflows until now. But what I wanted to do here is just give you guys a brief demonstration of what using agentic workflows looks like in my day-to-day. So to be clear, I personally do a few things with my day-to-day. Number 1 is I run LeftClick, which is a growth/outbound AI-enabled agency. We basically help you go to market for a product or service or scale up an existing product's outreach using AI and lead scraping mechanisms like you see here. We let you build completely autonomous outbound pipelines that don't rely on you or your team. You just end up with a bunch of booked meetings to sell your service in you or your salesperson's calendar. The other main thing I do is I create content like this. So I make YouTube videos. I write big, long guides on how to, build with agentic workflows and stuff like that. And so I'm constantly juggling between these 2 things. The third thing is I run a school community, actually a series of school communities, one called Maker School over here and one called Make Money with Make over here. And so I have a fair amount that I have to do on a daily basis, as I'm sure you can imagine. I have to do things for LeftClick that are kind of older school agency things. I need to create proposals and, I need to scrape leads from my clients and onboard them and stuff like that. Then I have to do things for school. Like I have to manage replies. I have to, send and receive DMs. I have to answer people's questions and so on and so forth. Plus I have to do things for YouTube. Like I have to create scripts and monitor YouTube for competitors and stuff like that. So let me just give you a brief example of what me doing all 3 of these things simultaneously would look like in an agentic workflow. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to have this run through basically my end-to-end agency flow using demo kickoff call transcript that I'm pulling up from my TMP folder. This is just plain text. I could pull this up from like Fireflies or any other like transcription tool if I wanted. I've just stored this plain text inside of TMP for simplicity. So I'll say run the post kickoff flow for demo kickoff call transcript. Over here, maybe I'm just getting started for the day and I want to see what sorts of YouTube outliers there are. With those YouTube outliers, I'm going to be able to ideate a new video or something like that, come up with an outline, and so on and so forth. So I'll say, run the YouTube outlier workflow and find me between 10 to 20 outliers for agentic workflows. This is what I'm going to be doing a fair amount today because, as you guys could see, I'm recording a video on agentic workflows, and it's sort of like the hot topic now. And over here on the right, I'm obviously managing my school community, and so I built up some agentic workflows to help me pull relevant questions and comments and stuff like that from school. Pull the top 10 most recent school posts from Maker School. And so now I have these 3 Claude code instances basically running in the background for me. And all I'm going to do as somebody that is, attempting to be economically productive is I'm just going to sit here and then watch over these and then, add and chime in where necessary. So over here on the left-hand side, it's asking me some simple questions. Because I'm doing a demo here, say Nick at leftclick.ai, do the lead gen with modified query. And then everything else too. Cool. Over here on the right-hand side, I see that we're done with my school posts. So now I have a bunch of information about this. Looks like Suvam recently posted a cold email guide. So I'm going to say, Suvam's cold email guide, run me through his step-by-step. This over here in the middle is using the TubeLab API, which is part of one of the agentic workflows that I put together to go and then scrape me a bunch of outliers. So one of our members, Suvam, was kind enough to share with us how he made $500,000 in about 6 months or so using Instantly, which is a cold email tool, and then a lot of the same principles that we talk about here. So he ran through and actually provided a ton of info. And I'm just curious what that looks like. I could, of course, use the school UI. I could log into school and then scroll through the post myself and stuff like that. But I set up an agentic workflow to do this. Why? Because it becomes really easy to do really cool things with agentic workflows inside of school. Like hypothetically, I got a lot of questions, right? And what I did was I built a RAG, or retrieval augmented generation tool that essentially looks every time somebody asks a question to see if something similar has been answered in the community before. If so, it actually goes and it gives me the link. Then what I can do is, as I respond to them, I could just copy the link over and say, by the way, if you want a much more detailed explanation, check out this post, or so on and so forth. So what I'm seeing here on the cross niche outlier sheet is it's looking like we're not including all AI-based results. And that's probably because realistically, there just aren't any competitors for agentic workflows yet, because I've kind of coined the term. So that's great for me. What I'm going to do now is I'm just going to have it run some sort of outlier scraper for terms like AI agents instead. That should give me a fair amount of stuff to work with. Anyway, on the right-hand side here, now we're done with this. This is great. Fantastic. Comment, extremely valuable guide. So what I'm going to do is use my school system to go through this, get all of the post ID and stuff like that, and then actually send a comment on that saying, excellent or extremely valuable guide. If I open this up and then scroll all the way down to the bottom, you can see that I just left a comment here saying super valuable guide. And so I basically get to communicate with school, which is a service that previously required a graphical user interface, just entirely through an agentic workflow instead, which is fantastic. I'm sure future versions of agentic workflows will be able to recreate the UX any flavor or way that I want. But for now, this is pretty cool for me. I don't mind. Over on the left-hand side, you can see we came up with 15 leads. The reason why I did 15 and not say 1,500 is just because it was trying to be mindful of my token costs, knew that I was doing this as part of a demo. We've actually already gone through and got what I think is 9 emails, which is cool. And then after that, if we scroll a little bit further down, this actually went through and uploaded leads to the campaign, which is pretty sweet. It then even added things to a knowledge base, and then even went as far as to send a summary email to my client, which in this case, I just used my own email for, basically telling them, hey, we're done with the campaign and so on and so forth. What's really cool is it also gave me 3 links. So I'm just going to open up these 3 links, which take me directly to my cold email tool, where I can actually see the campaigns that it came up with. So this might sound crazy, but hear me out. I want to generate 50,000 in revenue for company name in the next 90 days. If I don't hit that number, I'll work for free until I do. How? LinkedIn Thought Leadership. I run a company. We spent 6 years helping 200 partners at professional services firms turn LinkedIn into a revenue channel. Accounting firms, consultancies, financial advisors, executive coaches. Our clients regularly close 50K deals directly from LinkedIn. Some see 3 to 10x follower growth, and most are getting 2 to 3 inbound leads per month once the content machine is running. I know this is bold, but I'm confident we could do something similar for you. Would you open to a quick chat? No pressure, just a conversation. I mean, this is just one of 3 campaigns with 2 split tests each. Obviously, while this copy is, I would consider very punchy and probably higher quality than like 85% of all of the copy that other people are running for campaigns like this. I'm going to like take a look at the copy, maybe make some minor changes before I actually go through the process. But it's still pretty great, right? I did notice that there was an issue here where the Gmail MCP was not authenticated. So because I was showing you guys how to authenticate MCPs in another video here, it was a demo that I did a few hours ago. It unauthenticated my MCP. Obviously, if this occurs, you need to re-authenticate, right? So what I would do in this case would be re-authenticate MCP, and then I would just go through that process together. On the right-hand side here, I'm going to say something like, hey, what sorts of questions have been asked in the last 24 hours that I can answer? So now I'm going to get a list of questions on the right-hand side here. That's pretty straightforward. While I'm doing this, I'm re-authenticating my Gmail MCP. That's going to trigger OAuth, which is pretty cool. In the middle here, we're still scraping more outliers. Would you give me the highest priority ones? Over here, we now need to restart the Gmail MCP server. So I'm just going to restart Claude Code. The new auth flow should capture a refresh token. Let me know once you've completed the browser authentication, and then I will start again. Cool. So what I'm going to do is I'll go new. Just going to go /MCP. We'll say auth my MCP, auth my Gmail MCP. Over here on the right-hand side, you see some people have asked some questions. So Emil's asked some questions about client delivery when you're offering a lead gen system. For how long should you sign up the client for, and how long can you keep on providing new leads for the company? For how long are you guys typically running campaigns for clients? On average, I run campaigns for a minimum of 90 days. I didn't used to do this, but I found that 90 days was sort of the sweet spot, as it typically takes some stopping and starting before you figure out the right offer combination and the right lead targeting. When I started, I went month to month entirely. I'd probably recommend that in your case, just to keep friction low. But hopefully this helps give you an understanding of the various ways that you could put something like this together. Then we have another question here, about $400. Well, first off, nice job on the $400. The JSS score tanking is hard to hear. My recommendation would be to send him a message, letting him know that immediately after you finished your contract, you had a massive JSS dump. This is something about Upwork. And softly implying that this will unfortunately have serious consequences as to your ability to get future work. I would also ask him if there's something or anything that you can do to improve that job success score, whether it's going back and providing free or additional work, etc. It looks like on the 3rd, he put some copy together. So I'm just going to say, show me the copy. Cool, and now this is going to go through top to bottom and then send that info. What's cool is this also formats my text for me, so I could just dump all this in. It's now going to authenticate, so I'm just going to head over to my email. Looks like it's successful, so we can go back here. This looks pretty solid. I would probably remove the just because this doesn't offer a lot of value. If you work with somebody in your niche, I would recommend that. This is usually considered positive social proof. The would you be open to a 15-minute call about this as the last question is a little weak. I would probably be hyper-specific with the times that I'm asking for, i.e., could you do okay, over here on the left-hand side, we have the Gmail MCP, so I'll just say, send me a hello email to nicholasserif@gmail.com. Over here, we have the output of our agent. So let's take a look at this. Looks like it's saying that a lot of these are related to ICE agents, which is sort of a political thing that's going on right now, which is why we're getting these outliers. Obviously, that's not what I'm going to be doing. I don't really care about looking for those outliers. But I do see some of these are more agent related. So AI agents that actually work the pattern Anthropic just revealed. We have the thumbnail right over here. That's cool. Google Workspace Studio between these two. Sam Altman looking quite menacing. These are pretty funny, honestly. Cool. Yeah. So I have some reasonable outliers here, which is nice. I'm probably not going to be able to do the political ones, and I'm not really making content like that. I'm more talking head, so I can avoid those. But hopefully you guys see that, now I have some outliers that I could work with that have just been released in the last few days. That, maybe I could start modeling my content around or something like that. Meanwhile, the MCP now works. So we did fix that. And then I've also sent 3 messages within school. So I'm just going to take a little peek at that. Cool. So just sent that. Just sent that, and then right over here, just said that. And you can see it's also formatted my text for me and stuff like that. Okay. So I don't do this because I think any of these 3 particular ones that I'm running are super powerful or super incredible or whatever, but these are just things that I had to do today, and I just figured I would run through them with you guys. This is like a practical look at the day-to-day work that I do within my agentic workflow IDE. And hopefully you guys see how this is a very simple and easy way to multiply your leverage, right? I mean, I just did a whole end-to-end workflow for admittedly a demo client, but a demo client nonetheless on the left-hand side. In the middle, I ran outlier detector. And on the right-hand side, I even interacted and engaged with school posts much faster than I could do manually. That automatically formatted my text, found good questions for me to answer, and so on and so forth. You guys can use agentic workflows in your IDE in the exact same way for whatever the knowledge work is that you need to do. Whether you're copywriting campaigns, whether you're scraping leads, whether you're just organizing your CRM or adding things to a record, it is now entirely possible. And I hope you guys also see that there is a split between the building of a workflow and then the using of the workflow. The building is something you do once, and then the using is an opportunity to make a return on investment on the building time over and over and over and over again, basically every day. I don't really think it's a far cry to say that most people could probably automate 50% or more of their day-to-day work using flows like this, and at minimum, at least make it 50% more enjoyable or easier.